The Zorath Empire stretched across 17 star systems, their crimson banners stained with the blood of conquered worlds. For 3 centuries, they had been the galaxy's apex predators, 8-foot tall, reptilian nightmares with razor claws that could slice through titanium and neural implants that made them living weapons. Their war fleets cast shadows over entire moons, and their very name sent civilizations into hiding. They were the alpha species, the ultimate evolutionary triumph, the hunters who had never known what it meant to be prey. Until now, the emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in the crystal chambers of Nexus Prime. Delegates from 47 species huddled together like frightened children. The holographic displays showed Zorath expansion routes painting the galaxy red, world after world falling to their relentless advance. No species has ever defeated them in open warfare, whispered Ambassador Kelthra, her blue skin pale with terror. The Martoxians tried. The Vex Coalition tried. All are extinct or enslaved. The assembled beings nodded grimly, remembering the story's entire star systems going dark. Distress signals cut short. Silence where civilizations once thrived. But then someone raised an uncomfortable question. What about the humans? That new species from the Sol system. Nervous laughter rippled through the chamber. Humans, those primitive bipeds who had barely achieved faster than light travel. Earth's first interstellar fleet hung in space like toys compared to the massive Zorath dreadnoughts approaching the outer colonies. The human ships were angular, functional, built from salvaged materials and desperate innovation rather than the organic curves of advanced alien technology. Council observers watched through long-range sensors, some placing bets on how quickly the humans would surrender. "Look at them," scoffed a Vorthan delegate. "They're using chemical propulsion for maneuvering thrusters. Primitive doesn't even begin to describe it." The consensus was clear: humanity would be another footnote in the Zoroth's catalogue of conquest, perhaps lasting a few days longer than the crystal farmers of Meridian 7. But the observers had never seen humans fight. The first Zorath invasion fleet dropped out of hyperspace above New Geneva, expecting the usual pattern: orbital bombardment, mass panic, quick capitulation. Instead, they found humans doing something no species had ever done, fighting back with everything they had. Civilians armed with mining lasers stood alongside soldiers with jury-rigged plasma rifles. Children too young to understand death helped reload ammunition. The Zorath commander, General Vekvar, watched through his tactical display as human defenders turned apartment buildings into sniper nests and subway tunnels into killing fields. "They fight like cornered animals," he reported to the fleet. But animals without the sense to know when they're beaten. His troops expected an easy slaughter and instead found themselves bleeding in the streets of an alien world that refused to die quietly. Commander Elias Ward stood atop the ruins of City Hall, his uniform torn and bloodied, addressing a crowd of survivors through a crackling communicator that broadcast across the embattled colony. "Listen to me." His voice carried over the sounds of distant explosions and plasma fire. "They think we're prey. They think we'll roll over and show our throats like every other species they've conquered." He raised his rifle, a simple projectile weapon that seemed laughably primitive against Zorath energy shields. "But we don't bow to predators. We are the children of Earth, the descendants of those who hunted mammoths and tamed wolves. We hunt them." The word spread across the battlefield, faster than any comm signal, carried by wounded soldiers and desperate civilians. Something fundamental shifted in the human psyche, the ancient predator awakening after millennia of civilization. The Zorath had mastered conventional warfare across 100 worlds, but humans fought with tactics that defied all military doctrine. Guerrilla fighters emerged from storm drains to plant explosives under Zorath vehicles before vanishing into maintenance tunnels. Snipers took impossible shots across kilometers of urban wasteland, their bullets guided by locally sourced targeting AI that adapted faster than Zorath countermeasures. Engineers hacked captured alien equipment mid-battle, turning Zorath weapons against their former owners with disturbing efficiency. For the first time in their 3-century reign of terror, the Zorath found themselves retreating from a world they had intended to conquer. The reports reaching their high command were unprecedented. Casualty rates approaching 30%, equipment losses mounting, and worst of all, uncertainty about the outcome of battle. The Alphas were learning what it meant to doubt. In the crystal chambers of the Galactic Council, delegates stared at the tactical displays in stunned silence. The preliminary reports were impossible to believe. Humans had not only survived the first Zorath assault, but had actually forced them back to orbital positions. Some scoffed, claiming the data had to be corrupted or falsified. Others whispered questions that had never been asked before. What if the Zorath aren't actually the galaxy's apex predators? What if there's something worse than alphas? The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop as the implications sank in. If the humans could bleed the Zorath, what did that make humanity? And what did it mean for the rest of the galaxy? The Zorath response was swift and overwhelming, 10 full battle fleets converging on human space with the fury of wounded pride. Entire worlds burned under their coordinated assault as they unleashed weapons that had shattered civilizations. Yet humanity refused to collapse. Every human colony became a fortress, every citizen a potential combatant. Cities that should have fallen in hours held out for weeks, their defenders fighting from the rubble with weapons that should have been obsolete. The Zorath committed more resources to this single campaign than they had to their last 5 conquests combined, and still the humans fought on. It was impossible, unprecedented, and deeply disturbing to a species that had never encountered meaningful resistance. The galaxy's military analysts struggled to understand what they were witnessing as reports filtered in from the war zones. Humans moved through combat with an efficiency that seemed almost mechanical, yet retained a creativity that no artificial intelligence could match. Snipers who could calculate wind resistance and target movement in their heads while under fire. Engineers who could jury-rig functional weapons from battlefield debris in minutes. Medics who would drag wounded comrades to safety, treat their injuries with field-expedient methods, and return to combat before their enemies could regroup. The narration of war correspondents took on an awed tone. The Zorath expected prey. What they found were predators of a different kind, hunters who had been pretending to be civilized. Zorath tactical doctrine had to be rewritten as their commanders struggled to counter an enemy that seemed to adapt faster than their strategies could evolve. Human fighters moved with the patience of persistent hunters, tracking their prey across continents and waiting days for the perfect shot. They struck with the coordinated precision of pack hunters, overwhelming superior numbers through superior teamwork. Most disturbing of all, they showed the cold calculation of apex predators who understood that sometimes the hunt required sacrifice. Zorath officers began calling humans Deathworld spawn, comparing them to the legendary predators of Earthsharks that could sense blood from kilometers away, wolves that hunted in perfect coordination, humans who had climbed to the top of their planet's food chain through intelligence and ruthless efficiency. The comparison began as an insult, but evolved into genuine fear. Humanity's transformation during the war was unprecedented. National borders dissolved as Earth-United Defense became humanity's banner. Factories retooled to manufacture weapons with supernatural efficiency. Scientists reverse-engineered alien technology in battlefield conditions. Children learned to identify Zorath aircraft by sound before they could read. Retirement became foreign as elderly humans contributed however they could. The species unified with single-minded focus that impressed and terrified the watching galaxy. This wasn't just mobilization, this was the awakening of something primal and deadly. The siege of Dravis 9 became the stuff of legend as 10 Zorath fleets surrounded the heavily fortified human world, expecting to end the war with overwhelming force. The humans had only 3 fleets to defend with, and military doctrine suggested they should have evacuated or surrendered. Instead, they turned the star system itself into a weapon. Asteroid mining platforms became kinetic bombardment systems. Communication satellites transformed into surveillance networks that tracked every Zorath movement. The humans fought with the patience of those who understood that sometimes victory required sacrifice, drawing the enemy fleets into kill zones that had been prepared months in advance. When the smoke cleared and the wreckage was tallied, the Zorath flagship, their pride, their symbol of invincibility, drifted powerless in space, its crew dead and its hull breached by weapons that shouldn't have been able to penetrate their shields. On the Zorath homeworld, the unthinkable was happening as their leaders faced reports of devastating losses for the first time in their species' recorded history. The great war chambers that had once echoed with plans for conquest now filled with desperate debates about survival. This was supposed to be another expansion, Grand Admiral Korthak said, his claws scraping nervously against the obsidian council table. A routine subjugation of a primitive species. Instead, we are hemorrhaging ships, troops, and resources at rates our economy cannot sustain. The implications were staggering. If the Zorath could not defeat humans, if their vaunted military superiority was an illusion, then what were they? And more importantly, what did that make the species that was systematically dismantling their empire? Humanity's ultimate weapon proved to be not superior technology or overwhelming numbers, but strategic thinking that operated on levels the Zorath had never encountered. Human intelligence operatives began a systematic campaign of assassination that targeted not just military leaders, but the entire command structure that held the Zorath Empire together. They infiltrated Zorath worlds, learned their languages, studied their psychology, and struck with the precision of surgeons removing a cancer. Zorath generals who had conquered dozens of worlds died in their sleep from untraceable poisons. Communication networks that had coordinated fleets across light years suddenly failed at critical moments. The empire that had seemed monolithically strong revealed itself to be a fragile network of interconnected systems, and humans began cutting those connections with methodical efficiency. A captured Zorath general found himself dragged before Commander Ward in the ruins of what had once been their forward command post, his proud bearing reduced to desperate defiance. The alien's vertical pupils fixed on the human commander with hatred that transcended species barriers. "You were never meant to rise," the Zorath snarled through his translator unit. "The galaxy has an order, a natural hierarchy. We are the Alphas." Ward studied the alien with the cold detachment of a predator evaluating wounded prey, his scarred face showing no emotion as he considered the creature that had helped orchestrate the deaths of millions of humans. "That's what prey always says," he replied quietly, his voice carrying the weight of certainty, "before it's eaten." The general's eyes widened as he finally understood the truth that was sweeping across the galaxy. The Alphas had found something worse than themselves. The war escalated beyond conventional military engagement into something that resembled an extinction event, as both species committed every resource to total victory. The Zorath unleashed biological weapons designed to target human physiology, engineered plagues that should have wiped out entire worlds. But humans adapted with a speed that defied biological possibility, their scientists developing countermeasures faster than the Zorath could deploy new variants. Every horror the Zorath visited upon human worlds was studied, understood, and turned back upon them with compound interest. The hunters had become the hunted, and they were learning that their prey possessed capabilities they had never imagined. The galaxy watched in awe and terror as the apex species fought for the right to exist, knowing that only one would survive to see the war's end. The fall of the Zorath throne world marked the end of an era as human soldiers stormed through the crystal spires that had stood as monuments to 3 centuries of conquest. The palace that had never known defeat echoed with the sounds of human boots as Ward personally planted Earth's flag where no other species had ever dared to tread. The Zorath Emperor, the being who had personally overseen the subjugation of 47 species, knelt in chains before representatives of a species he had considered beneath notice. The symbolic weight of the moment was not lost on anyone. The Alphas had fallen, and their conquerors wore the faces of those they had dismissed as primitive children. The galaxy's natural order had been shattered forever. The narration of war correspondents took on a tone of awe as they struggled to describe what they had witnessed. They were considered alpha predators, the ultimate evolutionary achievement, the perfect hunters who had never known defeat. But in the end, even alphas bleed, and when they did, humans finished the hunt. The word spread across communication networks throughout the galaxy, carried by species who had lived in terror of the Zorath for generations. The impossible had become reality. The monsters that haunted their nightmares lay dead at the feet of a species that had appeared from nowhere to accomplish what entire civilizations could not. The age of the Zorath was over, ended not by superior technology or overwhelming numbers, but by hunters who understood that sometimes the most dangerous prey fights back. The Galactic Council convened again, but the tone had changed from fear to reverence. Representatives who had dismissed humanity as primitive now spoke their names with careful respect. Tactical displays that once showed Zorath expansion now tracked human movements with nervous attention. Ambassador Kelthera addressed the assembly with words that would be remembered for millennia. "We thought we understood the galaxy's hierarchy. We were wrong. Humanity has done the impossible. They have killed the Alphas." The silence that followed was pregnant with implications that would reshape galactic politics for generations. In the aftermath of total victory, something unexpected began to happen as the surviving species of the galaxy looked to humanity not as a new threat to fear, but as protectors who might shield them from future horrors. The legend of humanity spread through trade routes and communication networks, growing with each telling. They became known as the Hunters of Hunters, the species that had accomplished the impossible by defeating those who could not be defeated. Diplomatic overtures arrived daily from civilizations that had hidden in the darkness during the Zorath reign, seeking alliance with the beings who had brought light back to the galaxy. Humanity found itself thrust into a leadership role they had never sought, but accepted with the same grim determination that had won them the war. Commander Ward stood before the assembled representatives of the known galaxy. His words broadcast across every inhabited world and carried to the farthest reaches of space. "We didn't want this war," he said, his voice carrying the weariness of someone who had seen too much death and paid too high a price for victory. "We wanted to explore the stars, to learn from you, to find our place among the civilizations of the galaxy. But we learned something important during this conflict. Humanity bows to none." The statement was not a threat, but a promise, a declaration that would define humanity's relationship with the galaxy for centuries to come. They would be protectors, not conquerors, but they would never again allow themselves to be considered prey by anyone. In the ruins of the Zorath homeworld, a mother whispered to her child as they sheltered in the remains of what had once been an impregnable fortress. "Remember this always," she said, her voice carrying the weight of a species' hard-learned wisdom. "Beware the humans. They are not what they appear to be. They hunt the hunters." The words would be passed down through generations of survivors, a warning and a lesson about the dangers of underestimating those who seem weak. The Zorath had learned too late that sometimes prey has teeth, and sometimes the hunters become the hunted. Humanity mourned their dead, even as they built monuments to victory, understanding that survival had come at a terrible cost. Each name carved into steel reminded them of the price of freedom. Memorial gardens bloomed on every human world, tended by those who had fought and those saved by their sacrifice. The war had changed humanity forever, awakening something primal that could never be put back to sleep. They had learned what it meant to be apex predators. The story closed with Earth ships pushing further into unexplored space, no longer the tentative explorers they had once been, but legends feared and respected throughout the galaxy. Humanity had transcended its origins as a primitive species from a backwater world to become something unprecedented, the hunters of hunters, the killers of alphas, the species that had done the impossible. Their expansion into the galaxy was no longer a desperate scramble for resources and knowledge, but the measured advance of a species that had proven itself against the ultimate test. The stars themselves seemed to part before their approach, offering pathways to new worlds and new adventures. The final narration echoed across the cosmos with the weight of absolute truth. They thought they were alpha predators, the ultimate evolutionary achievement, the perfect hunters who had conquered everything they encountered, until humans proved otherwise. The words carried to every corner of the galaxy, a reminder that even the mightiest could fall, that even the most fearsome predators could become prey when faced with something more dangerous than themselves. In the end, the Zorath had learned the hardest lesson in the universe. There is always something higher on the food chain. A lone human soldier stood on the observation deck of a starship, staring into the infinite darkness of space where new mysteries waited to be discovered. The war was over, the alphas were dead, and humanity had claimed its place among the stars. But the soldier knew that somewhere, in that vast darkness, new challenges waited.